Happy Friday. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining from. Thanks for tuning into this webinar on a refresher on marketing landscape changes and how can you best pivot your measurement strategy. To quickly introduce myself, my name is Nidhal. I'm a lead digital analytics consultant with InfoTrust based out of our office in Dubai. I work primarily with CPG clients, but previously I've also worked with e-commerce, fintech, retail, and other sets of clients as well. Some of my passionate areas are digital analytics and data visualization. And today I will be walking you through some of the previous or very recent analytics changes or marketing landscape changes that will affect how we try to understand about our customers and change our overall measurement strategy. So let's dive right in. Firstly, let's look at a few data privacy statistics. These numbers tell a lot about what is the perception of trust and how businesses need to be more oriented towards consumer trust as we move towards a more privacy-oriented world. If you look at some of these numbers, for example, a good number or a good percentage of customers are reluctant to agree that they are getting enough transparency about how their data is being used. They do not have the ability to protect their own personal data because they feel that it's not within their control directly. And companies have admitted many a times that sometimes sensitive information is accessible for a lot of entities or people within the organization that it should not have access to. And it's because of all of these reasons, it's becoming more and more difficult for users to get or consumers to get more trust in a business or a brand. Just a quick pause. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in either chat or Q&A, and we will be addressing all the questions towards the end. Let's look at the fundamental methods of how online behavior of consumers can be tracked. One of the conventional ways of tracking certain details about a user, such as the location from where a user is logging in or visiting a website, or the details of the company or the country or geo-specific other details can be tracked, is IP address-based tracking. We have pixel tracking, which is very commonly used by third-party platforms like Facebook or email automation platforms like HubSpot or Emarsys. Pixel tracking is technically a pixel or an image request. It's also called as a web beacon. It's basically a script that runs when a certain portion of a content is accessed by the user. For example, if on a web page, a page was viewed and a pixel can be loaded as a script, which then sends confirmation to the third-party platform that a user has accessed that particular page. And the same can apply with emails as well. This is how you usually obtain email open rates and read rates and things like that. There is another technique known as fingerprinting, which is being spoken about a lot these days, especially because it's one of the ways to obtain behavioral as well as customer intent related data in a very evasive manner. So fingerprinting is a process by which you try to put together several attributes about a customer's maybe browser, device, even the browser version and other such similar attributes, put all of that together into like a concatenated string or a format where you have all of those identifiers combined, and then creating a unique profile of a user on the internet. So this is also a very common method deployed by marketers to stitch together different attributes of a user and then identify that user across the internet. And finally, cookies used to be one of the most favorite ones. Used to be, the invention of cookies itself was like a huge milestone in the web analytics space, especially because it made things much easier. you're able to store local data files on a user's browser, and using those data files and the data collected in those files, which could be retrieved by marketing or advertising or analytics companies, primarily to identify the same user across multiple websites. When it comes to cookies, cookies can be set in different contexts. It can be in the first party context or in the third party context. But let's also look at what are some of the different types of cookies from a point of view of the functions that they perform. Firstly, we have the necessary or the essential cookies. These are the cookies that does not require specific or explicit consent. The purpose of these cookies is to provide certain functionality on the website. And this is, not collecting any user related information or other sort of personal data. Functional cookies, again, are adding to the functionality, can also be used for personalization, like very basic personalization, not to target users across other websites also, but primarily on the site itself in a very first party context. You also have statistical cookies, or these are also known by the term analytics cookies. And these help owners to understand whether the visitor on a site has visited previously. Is that a returning user, a new user, or other behavior related data, such as which are some of the pages that were visited in the previous session. And then you have marketing cookies, which can be used to display advertisements related to user, relevant to users, and it can be adapted based on user interest. One of the latest updates, and this has been there around for a while, so many of you may have heard this coming up, that third-party cookies are going to be deprecated in Google Chrome. And the focus on Google Chrome, because that's one of the browsers which has, one of the largest market shares, right? And this screenshot is actually from a website that I had visited a few days back, and I never noticed, I was trying to clear the cookies on that website, and I never noticed that around 353 cookies were placed on my browser within a span of, just a few seconds of visiting the website. Most of them, in fact, probably 75 to 80% of them were third-party cookies. And they were, collecting, they were probably belonging to also affiliates that did not have anything to do with the site that I was visiting, right? So this is also known as a term cookie stuffing. But this is going to be a thing of the past very soon. In 2023, that's when the planned or announced deprecation of third-party cookies is expected to happen. There are still a lot of developments in that regard, even these days. So to sum up, these are some of the events that are leading to the death of the cookie or the third-party cookie. Firstly, in August 2019, Google announced that there will be a more private web, and an initiative known as the Privacy Sandbox was launched. We will talk more about the Privacy Sandbox, but at a high level, this is a proposal to create a more private and a secure web by Google. This announcement was closely followed by another one about Chrome going to deprecate support for third-party cookies. And the final announcement, which is expected to happen in late 2023, is that we are going to complete, or Google is going to complete the supporting of, or the phase out of support for third-party cookies, especially with Chrome. And there are a lot of there's a lot of ongoing work for introducing new APIs, other methods of tracking. Topics API was a very recent release. Earlier, there were proposals including conversion APIs. But eventually, the plan is that third-party cookies will no longer be reliable or will no longer be used or leveraged by marketers to identify customers across different websites and then use that data for targeting or other advanced sort of use cases. Let's dive a bit deep into the Privacy Sandbox initiative by Google. Technically, it's a set of open standards that enable tracking users, but also while keeping privacy at the forefront and maintaining their privacy. It can be used for large-scale ad delivery without compromising on individual user information. And thus, Privacy Sandbox claims to have a better safety or security standards for customers, thereby reducing the possibility of frauds. There's also the concept of trust tokens, which is a method to validate users without, for example, right now we are using CAPTCHAs or those images to validate that a user is a human user and not a bot. But in future, these could get replaced by trust tokens. And there are a lot of topics, APIs being introduced, like the topic API or the conversion API, to collect user data while also maintaining anonymity. And the whole purpose of this additional set of methodology is because now you are able to track conversion related information or conversion, overall conversions for a user without tracking individual, personal data about that user. One of the latest updates in this regard is that Google was partnering with CMA, which is UK's competition regulation. This was a requirement, especially from the European market. But it looks like Google has got the immediate, at least the initial go-ahead from CMA to go ahead with the Privacy Sandbox initiative itself. And this is definitely a space to look out for. There are a lot of updates coming up every other day, and we need to be mindful of what is the state as of today may change very, very quickly. So it's definitely something to be looked at a more frequent basis for updates. Here's one example of how the Privacy Sandbox is going to make tracking or identifying individual users across the web slightly more difficult task. For example, the user agent string earlier, if you look at the old one here, it was more specific with the Android versions or the device details, and then the specific browser version IDs. But this is going to change with just like how IP address masking works. The last few strings are going to be appended with zeros. So this is just a practical way of looking at it, and an actual example of how things or data collection could differ when these new measures will be put into place. Let's look at what does the death of the third-party cookie mean for most of us as marketers or advertisers. Firstly, marketing attribution is going to be a big question mark, especially with the end of view-through attribution. View-through attribution relies excessively on third-party cookies and through the process of cross-domain tracking. Identifying the same user across multiple other domains used to be a crucial factor, especially for advertising and from the point of view of calculating view-through attribution. From an ad retargeting and personalization point of view, it's going to be lesser efficient with marketers losing visibility about user behavior and interests. Frequency caps are a way of limiting the exposure of the same ad to the same user multiple number of times and setting an upper limit or a cap. And that's going to take a small impact. Audience loss is one of the major concerns for most businesses, especially when you are relying on audiences within walled gardens like Facebook or Google, and you don't have your own first-party audience. So setting up your first-party audience from scratch is going to be more critical than ever. So is it time to press the panic button? With a lot of updates these days, that's one of the typical responses. But do we need to really panic when we hear about third-party cookies going away? In fact, the answer is no. As has always been, the marketing landscape has changed a lot over the years, and it will continue to change. But as long as we have more other alternative solutions and technology also developing, we may have alternate ways to achieve the end means that we want to do from a point of view of understanding our customers, their behaviors, and how we can target the right customer base to achieve the business goals. So cookieless tracking is one of the prominent methods where you are using more compliant solutions and depending lesser on the cookies, because cookies having a dependency on cookies for your marketing or advertising plan is not a good idea and not future-proof. So you need to also think about, is cookieless tracking the way to go from a long-term standpoint? It's driven by a lot of changes with respect to the browser environment, or from a privacy regulations or legislation standpoint. It does not depend on cookies, and then that makes it much easier to get unaffected by other technology that's supposed to block cookies, especially with mobile browsers. Most of the mobile browsers are designed to shed cookies, and this means that with cookieless tracking, you will be able to have more efficient mobile tracking. And it also enables cross-device tracking in addition to cross-domain tracking. Let's just compare a few attributes about cookie-based tracking and cookieless tracking. Cookie-based tracking is less complex to set up, and you are able to leverage client-side technology, which is, for example, cookies or text files stored on a user's local system, whereas server-side technology is more from the server side. There's additional server management costs that may be involved. There may be additional complexity to deploy something that was really a straightforward, easy deployment in cookie-based tracking, but it also comes with more control, more accuracy, and lesser performance on the actual, lesser effects on actual site performance. It's more compliant towards privacy regulations, cookieless tracking, but the implementation is complex, as I said before. One of the return on investment is better user experience, especially because there are going to be lesser scripts run on the client side. And there's better security if you use cookieless tracking against fraud, for example, cookie stuffing, an example of which we just saw a while ago. Let's now take a look at what is first-party data. Most of you may be familiar, but just to refresh, it is data collected firsthand from the customer, could be via any of these sources, for example, apps or the sites, call centers, email responses, etc. Let's look at how is first-party data different from third-party data. In most cases, first-party data is individual insights and does actually correlate or does represent an actual individual, because the data has been collected, in most cases, via consent from an individual customer or a user itself. But third-party data could be data in more aggregated format, could be by an external source. You may have to pay an external third-party source to actually collect that data. And this may not actually translate to an individual level or a user level actual paying customers. Therefore, first-party data is more reliable and authentic because you got that data via consent from your actual customers. Third-party data can be used more for augmenting existing data, and hence for most use cases, it's suggested to have an existing first-party data, and then you can use additional third-party data to augment the existing information that you have, which is in your possibly in your CRM or in your other systems. First-party data requires dedicated effort. Like I said before, you may have to set up data pipelines from scratch. You will need experienced resources on the team, but third-party data is more easily available because some of that is already available, just in case you have like a budget to acquire that data. Why is first-party data important? Firstly, it gives you complete ownership. You have complete visibility and control over how data is getting collected and how it is being passed on from one system to other, which gives you more control over making sure that certain regulations are being met or avoiding any violations from a point of view of data transfer or sale of personal data. It also puts you in a better position with respect to compliance. And in most cases, first-party data is obtained via consent, which also gives you more accuracy, reliability, control, and trust is a factor of the customer having, feeling more, feeling safer while sharing that data or personal information with you. Let's look at some use cases once you have first-party data collection set up. So some common use cases involve, for example, setting up your first-party audience from scratch and then using that for retargeting. You can also do customer segmentation, identify different segments that could be prospective from a point of view of analyzing that segment, and then also retargeting them with the best offers that work for certain groups of customers over others. Certain advanced use cases like marketing mix modeling and personalization may also come into the picture. Personalization, especially because you now are getting that individual customer related information with consent from that customer itself. Taking a step back, looking at some of the foundations of marketing and advertising, there is a concept known as contextual advertising, which is becoming much more relevant right now, especially with the death of the third-party cookie. Contextual advertising is basically using the advertising space on a website to display ads that are exactly matching the context of the content that is being presented on that website, thus leading to a more seamless experience. And the customers may not actually feel like they are being presented with an ad because it fits right into the context. So a few things about contextual advertising. It does not depend on the user's actual data or the intent of a user. It is always focused towards a better user experience and not a disconnected or a disjoint experience. And it may not be super precise like a micro-targeted ad, but you cannot say that it is not effective. Let's look at a couple of examples for contextual advertising. For example, you see on an article about books, there is an advertisement for reading glasses, which fits right into the context. And on a recipe page, a certain products or ingredients are being advertised, which all fits into the context. Previously, with cookies, you would need to identify what was a user's intent or what was a user's previous interest or browsing history based data that third-party cookies have collected, which would then be used to display an ad that would have been relevant to that individual, but may not be relevant to that content on that page itself. So here, this is a switch towards more context and not feeling an out of place experience for the end user. Let's also look at a few browser updates because this is a critical part of it, right? All of the web analytics or tracking mechanisms extensively rely on the browsers and how they have certain restrictions set up. A lot of browsers are advertising a pro-privacy approach, which also means with every passing day, there are new challenges that an analytics tracking company or an organization is facing with respect to certain restrictions. For example, if we look at Chrome, one of the largest updates is Privacy Sandbox. Google has been transparent about the plans to roll out Privacy Sandbox, the timeline. There are intermittent release updates about what's going on and when is the expected timeline for rollout of new features, etc. Firefox guarantees total cookie protection. It helps the user to clear all the data that is collected, which all browsers do not provide actually. So it gives more advanced control to even delete data stored in partition storage or cookie jars, which is usually deemed inaccessible by a normal, not so tech savvy user. Brave browser has also been at the forefront of privacy related changes. So now there have been updates in web permission lifetimes. For example, if there is a site that is trying to access your location, you can set a limit on, for how long the site can, capture that location. There's also bounce tracking protection. For example, if you land on a URL and when you navigate across to a different site, sometimes there are certain URL parameters that get appended with the objective of identifying the same user across websites. So that's bounce tracking, and bounce tracking protection is offered by Brave browser. It also recently added the partitioning network state for a more privacy-oriented approach. The partitioning network state is technically states that, for example, if you are loading a Facebook widget on one site and the same user is loading a Facebook widget on another site, Facebook, even though it's common across the widget is common across both sites, will not be able to identify that it's the same user who accessed the Facebook widget from both the sites. So it's a mechanism to prevent those sites or that data silos to communicate with each other and then identify users across different ecosystems. Safari has the privacy report. There is a lot of features like hide my email, and a lot of others with the latest iOS versions, which gives the user more control over how much data can be collected by apps. Recently, I was using my iPhone, and I got a pop-up saying your location was tracked during the last 24 hours by so many apps, even though you don't require that location feature for those apps while they were running in the background, right? In a previous world, we were not presented with that data, even though it was being collected about us. But now, everything is about notifying the user, letting them know that they are being tracked even in the background. Let's look at what's on the horizon and the way forward. These are terms or terminologies that may come up in your day-to-day conversations, gaining more and more popularity these days. Consent management platforms, like, for example, OneTrust or Evidon, or others are becoming more and more common. With every passing day, more organizations feel the need to set up consent management platforms, especially in the markets like Europe, where GDPR has been in effect since multiple years now. And many violations are also being reported. So you need to be prepared for managing user consent and making sure none of your tags fire without a user consenting to it. Consent mode is another feature within Google Analytics or Tag Manager, which can be used to model data about non-consented users, but that's only behavioral data and not any personal identifiable information, thus making it a privacy-friendly solution. Trust tokens is also introduced by Google as a way to authenticate users and communicating that data across websites to identify that it's a human user and not a bot. Global privacy control is driven by regulations such as CCPA and CPRA. It's an effort to opt out against sale of personal data at a global scale. And this has been one of the highlights in the last couple of weeks, right? The sunset of universal analytics, and how GA4 is expected to take over in 2023. A lot of us have already been dual tagging, setting up tags for GA4, getting prepared for the end date, but the actual date has been released by Google. In July 2023, we are expecting that all non-360 or free UA properties will stop collecting data and processing data. In October 2023, this will also happen for the 360 properties, and possibly in 2024, the universal analytics data may not be accessible for historical data analysis. Hence, it is very much recommended that you start tracking or tagging for GA4 and be prepared to have historical data set up for when you'll actually start relying on GA4 as a single source of truth. A few closing thoughts. You can use customer lists to upload customer information that is obtained via consent to Google Ads as an audience. Identity resolution is becoming a challenge, especially for identifying and matching customers across different platforms, especially in the absence of third-party cookies. Data clean rooms is a way of setting up a sandbox environment where aggregated data can be analyzed for advanced analysis and marketing use cases. So I will end this webinar with a question. Which way are you headed? Would you like to stay ahead of the changes and be a pioneer, especially as these severe changes are happening, and change is the only constant right now? Or would you like to just watch where the rest of the world is heading, not getting the first mover advantage, but probably observing more of what is happening, which could also possibly mean you take a bit of an impact when some of these changes have a direct hit on your data collection strategy. With that, I'll stop this webinar, and probably if you have any questions, feel free to put them in chat or Q&A. Thank you.